Welcome back. Now, scandal is something that members of the Canadian establishment try to avoid at all costs. So last summer, when Douglas Brown, a former teacher of the country's elite private school, Upper Canada College, was arrested on charges of sexual abuse, it was quite a shock. The criminal case includes 10 former students whose allegations go back as far as 1975. Upper Canada College, located in Toronto, has also been named in a class action civil suit that is asking for $62 million. The accused teacher, Douglas Brown, stopped teaching at Upper Canada in 1993. So why has it taken so long for this case to come forward?
Because of the sensitive nature of the ongoing criminal investigation and civil lawsuit, the victims in our story are not identified. We do, however, examine how UCC reacted when it was confronted with the allegations of sexual abuse. The school is adamant it did and is still doing the right thing. But is that true? Did Upper Canada College know about the alleged abuse and keep silent to protect its reputation?
Danny is not his real name, and he's not the typical image of a former student of Upper Canada College. When I meet him in a hotel room, he tells me about the indecent assaults he alleges happened to him while he was a student at UCC.
Well, it was grade 7. At any rate, I'm a late year baby, you know, December. So for me, it was 11, turning 12. Yeah, hairless. You know, I hadn't hit puberty, that's how I put it.
When did you first realize what had happened to you was the wrong thing to happen to a young boy?
I first tried to kill myself in grade 10, let's put it that way. Swallowed a hell of a lot of 222s. That time, I guess it still is over the counter. They come in various bottle sizes.
The college has had to deal with the tragic knowledge of the possible sexual abuse in the 1970s of a number of its students. Charged with these crimes is one of our former teachers, and the case is expected to go to court sometime this year, I expect.
10 men have come forward alleging abuse by an English teacher named Douglas Brown. 19 counts, ranging from indecent assault, gross indecency, to forcible confinement.
In dealing with it, there was one consuming principle that guided our actions, and that was to seek out and endeavor to what we simply called the right thing. We want to do the right thing.
But did Upper Canada always do the right thing? We've discovered that since 1975, UCC has repeatedly been made aware of allegations about Douglas Brown. What Danny and the other victims want to know is, why did it take Upper Canada so long to act on these allegations? Were they simply trying to protect their reputation at the expense of the welfare of their students? After all, their reputation here began in 1829 when the school was first founded to groom the sons of the Canadian establishment. To appreciate what's at stake in this case and the enormous pressure Principal Blakey is under to protect the college's reputation, it's important to recognize just how entrenched UCC is within the old Canadian establishment. Built on the British public school model, UCC was where the sons of the elite were sent for their education. UCC has long played host to high society, governor generals, and visiting dignitaries. Graduates known as old boys or founders include people like John Eaton, Ted Rogers, and Robertson Davies. Old boy Ian Douglas explains how UCC was the necessary ticket into the upper echelons of society.
It was dominated by a small WASP upper class, largely military. And Upper Canada was firmly cemented into that. Upper Canada was where you sent your children, if they were males, in order to be educated, in order to get them into their roles in society that they were supposed to occupy by virtue of their heritage and inherited privilege. There was this huge code of rigid, intolerant discipline permeated by the threat of immediate and often arbitrary punishment. The cane was in frequent use in those days, a regular daily occurrence somewhere in the school, most often in the boarding houses.
Like the boarding students who eventually came forward in the Brown case, Ian Douglas discovered that some teachers at UCC didn't have to account for their actions. There was an unspoken tradition, the kind you find in the military. What happened at the school stayed inside the school.
That particular day, for just the way it had worked, I was standing near the place where this man was seated at the head of one of the trestle tables. And something innocent happened. I mean, there was some exclamation, or there was some shuffle, or some movement, and his head swung around. And he focused on me, and he said, "Douglas, principal's office, after assembly." Just like that. So assembly ended a few minutes later. I went off to the principal's office, and he beat me with a cane. I to this day know what I did to attract his attention. I don't know whether he had it in for me and decided that, I was going to be a victim and he was going to find a reason to do it. But it was completely arbitrary. It was brutal and sadistic, and it stayed with me all my life.
By 1975, the year Douglas Brown arrived, caning had been banned. But there were few other restrictions, and Brown appears to have taken full advantage of the laissez-faire environment.
His reputation was as a really, pretty wild, way-out English teacher.
He brought in popular culture. One year, Pink Floyd's The Wall was on his syllabus. He was the first teacher I had that made us memorize poetry.
But there was another side to Douglas Brown's charisma. He would drink beer with students in his apartment, and he was known to have a violent temper.
One of the first things they'd ask you in English class is, "Do you know Mr. Brown?" And you'd say, "Oh, well, sure, I know him." And they would ask you these really insinuating questions. Well, do you do the same things as Mr. Brown does? And I would play games and say, "Well, what do you mean?" Of course I teach grammar. Of course we do novels and plays. No, come on, sir, you know what we mean. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink, a la Monty Python. I said, "Well, what do you mean?" "Well, like drink beer."
He had a temper that you didn't want to cross in some way that I cannot remember or fathom. I tested him, and he screamed at me. He didn't yell, he screamed, and I was scared out of my life.
Prep school headmaster Dick Howard, now deceased, hired Douglas Brown in 1975. Brown moved into an apartment on campus, and within days of his arrival, the young boarding students under his care were talking about being touched by Mr. Brown. UCC's current principal, Douglas Blakey, says that there's no documentation of the complaints in 1975. But we found several people who remember those events well. This is the voice of one of the victims. We'll call him Brian. So Brown came into your cubicle one night, just late at night when you were sleeping?
Yeah. And the next thing I knew, he was on top of me.
And that's when you woke up?
I recall waking up when he sat on the end of my bed. And I just sort of, curled up and, tried to think happy thoughts. And, just really didn't know what was going on.
Former UCC teacher Anthony Hearn, who went on record in the National Post saying that he was absolutely confident that no abuse took place while he was there, told us a different story. Hearn spent 36 years at the school, and he does recall hearing complaints about Douglas Brown from the school's matron.
I want to be exact about this. She told me that the boys were talking about it. They hadn't gone and told her. She said this was the talk in the house.
And what happened? Was there any investigation?
Well, Dick Howard had them in and talked to them, and they didn't seem to be terribly upset.
And do you
he assured them that it wouldn't happen again, and they just said, well, I hope it won't, and that was it.
But Brian, one of the two boys allegedly touched, has a much different recollection of that meeting. Can you describe then what happened when you were called in? Do you remember?
Yeah, they were both sitting there. Hearn and Howard were both sitting there fairly grim-faced, and started asking a lot of, very obtuse questions. They wouldn't really come right out, as I recall, and make an accusation. What I believe their first question was something along the lines of, is anything strange going on in the boarding house? And, I didn't know how to take that question. Because when you're there, your first few months away from home, well, the whole experience is strange. And, did they mean, were we, having pillow fights and water fights and, pulling pranks on each other? Well, that's what we do. That's what we did then. And I sort of thought that they were trying to get to the bottom of something like that. It wasn't until some time later, and probably some years later, that I realized what they might be talking about the Doug Brown thing. I don't think they mentioned him by name.
So no one talked about molestation or sexual assault, or those words weren't used?
No.
Julia Hastings had her son tutored by Douglas Brown and has publicly come forward to defend him.
And I feel so strongly about this because it's such an injustice that men this many years later will, in fact, jeopardize their whole family name, disgrace their family name. Think of it. They will obviously never be able to run for politics. Their names will be in the newspaper. Their kids will never belong to a good club or good school. And what's it for? It's for money. It's for big bucks. It's for $63 million, I believe, to split.
But there's no question that there was, and you've talked to Douglas Brown about it, there was a relationship of some kind between the boys and Douglas.
Oh, and all of them. He said, how could this happen, with tears in his eyes? How could this happen? These boys loved me. I loved them. I taught them. We had such a mutual, happy arrangement. Everything was cool. I didn't feel that much older than they. We did, we had fun together.
Most kids are what? Just, a little bit nervous and cautious about stuff. Not everybody's, like the teenagers or the kids like you see in the movies. The majority of them are just trying to figure it out as you and me, and except they're just that much either more naive or trusting or whatever it is, or looking for an uncle or, a surrogate father or somebody to hang out with.
Not only are there no records of the 1975 allegations, UCC has no records at all of Douglas Brown's 18 years spent teaching at the school. No records until Brown was terminated in 1993. Detective Mark White is in charge of the current criminal investigation.
I looked for records. I did a search warrant and obtained Doug Brown's file. He started in 1975 as a teacher there, and his file starts in 1993.
There's no records of Doug Brown at Upper Canada College from 75 to 92?
There's only one letter that I've received, and I believe they dug that out of the archives, that announces his addition to the faculty of the school.
I think in most historical cases, you'd have trouble finding records because people didn't keep them, or they kept them and destroyed them. I think that's par for the course. I think not keeping records is something that's done very intentionally.
Dr. Peter Jaffe has actually been hired by UCC to work with the Honorable Sidney Robbins on a student safety review to prevent future cases of abuse. 2 years ago, Jaffe consulted with Robbins on a guide to preventing sexual misconduct in Ontario schools.
Well, the sooner you come forward on behalf of victims, the better. Victims feel re-victimized in a variety of ways. When someone does come forward, if nothing happens, that's a form of being re-victimized because you're silenced. If people doubt what happened, or there's no protection, taken with other potential victims. I think that's a form of being re-victimized, because then you feel like it's all for naught. So I do think we have a responsibility to victims to act swiftly and to act in ways that are going to protect them and potential future victims.
It's just a sense of trust, and the whole damn thing has never been the same in that respect. And it's insidious. Quite often, you know, it takes you being able to find some sort of objective place to find out just how the hell did I end up here? I mean, I wasn't like this in grade 8, you know, the way I am now, and it's really, until this whole thing is resolved, it's just a continuation and getting worse.
Danny finally went to police on August 1st of the year 2000, and a criminal investigation was launched. That's when Danny discovered that UCC knew about other victims for almost a decade. Did Upper Canada try to bury the story? Well, as it turns out, in 1993, the school paid one of the complainants from 1975 a settlement of $25,000. That same year, Principal Douglas Blakey hired a law firm to conduct a 2-month-long internal investigation into the allegations about Douglas Brown. That investigation turned up 3 names of alleged victims. But Principal Blakey decided to call the report inconclusive. He decided not to come forward and go to the police, and to keep the matter within the school. Detective Mark White, who's currently running the criminal investigation, found that report to be very important to his case.
I did a search warrant, executed a search warrant at Upper Canada College, and received the file of Douglas Brown, and went through that. And in that file, it gave me names of other students who were involved in the investigation in 1993. And I contacted them, found that indeed they were victims themselves, and took statements from them, laid charges.
When we come back, we'll look at why Upper Canada College didn't go to the police when they knew of 3 victims back in 1993. We'll also find out how Douglas Brown got a letter of reference from the principal who supposedly fired him. Please stay with us.
Welcome back. We continue with our investigation into the sexual abuse allegations at Upper Canada College. Douglas Brown, the teacher charged, taught at the school for 18 years. The victims we spoke with said that Upper Canada College had repeatedly been made aware of those allegations, both in 1975 and again in 1993. But the school didn't go to the police until years later.
So, how did Douglas Brown leave UCC and go on to teach again? How did he get a letter of reference from the principal? And was this a case of what's known as passing the trash? Here's part 2 of our story.
They've been forced into the open now. It's only because of the media attention and the police, and otherwise my strongest feeling is that if UCC could have buried this, they would have.
James Fitzgerald, who worked as a consultant on this documentary, is a former UCC student and author of the book Old Boys. He says this has been a public relations nightmare for Upper Canada College.
Their whole lifeblood, their whole foundation of the school depends on donations. This is a $40 million operation. They have the power, and they have done it. They've raised $20 million in 1 year for a new physical plant. So there's a very powerful place, but paradoxically a very vulnerable place too.
And a school like Upper Canada, any independent school, depends on its reputation in order for its continued existence.
Oh yes, I do shake. I do.
Despite his painful caning experience, Ian Douglas doesn't want the school to crumble under the pressures of the Brown case. He was a student at UCC in the 1950s when the building was found to be structurally unsafe. A rebuilding project began. Today, Douglas and other old boys are working to see that UCC rebuilds its reputation.
We saw the college of today, which I think is probably a very good institution and worth preserving. We saw it coming under a great deal of attack, possibly in the legal system, and with possibly adverse financial consequences. Nothing good can happen if the institution deteriorates and goes out of existence.
we want to do the right thing. We have been actively assisting the police throughout the investigation. We have been open with the entire UCC community. We have encouraged our graduates to come forward if they have something to report to the police, and we have offered support to any of our graduates, this includes the alleged victims, who would benefit from it.
But has UCC always been open with the entire community? In a speech to a UCC school assembly on September 7th of last year, Principal Blakey explained that he didn't go to the police back in 1993 because one of the former victims wasn't ready to do so. But what about the other two victims that he knew of? We managed to reach them both, and we asked them if they would have cooperated with police. If in 1993 the police had contacted you and they'd said that we've got your name from another student or from the school, would you have helped the police?
Oh, yeah, I think so.
You never said, I won't talk to the police about this?
No, never said that, no. No, I would have gone along, absolutely.
In 1997, after Blakey had received even more allegations about Douglas Brown, he did contact police, but without disclosing the individual's name. Exactly what he could have done back in 1993. And this is what bothers the other victim. If Douglas Blakey had done the exact same thing that he did in 97 and 93, for example, if he'd contacted the police without using your name to protect your identity, would you have talked to the police?
Yes.
Would you have helped out in an investigation?
Yes.
And would this case have been brought forward quicker, do you think?
Oh, I'm sure it would. And yes, I mean, that is the question on everybody's lips, isn't it? It's an incredible thing that they've done.
Even though he called his 1993 internal investigation inconclusive, Principal Blakey nonetheless terminated Douglas Brown's employment and paid him a severance package. But we've also learned that Principal Blakey did a lot more than just pay Douglas Brown some money. He also wrote him a detailed letter of reference, something the law didn't require him to do. And even the expert that UCC has hired to consult on its student safety policies characterizes this kind of action as passing the trash.
Passing the trash, I think, refers to anything you might do with the potential perpetrator of child sexual abuse, where you move them on by some way, by allowing them to resign without any more investigation, by offering them a reference, by anything that encourages them to get a job elsewhere where their behavior may continue. I mean, that's passing the trash.
I want to ask you as an expert, because I have a letter here. Here's the letter of reference Principal Blakey wrote to for Doug Brown. May 14th, 93. This is to whom it may concern. Mr. Douglas Brown joined the faculty of Upper Canada Preparatory School as a teacher in the fall of '75. During his UCC career, Mr. Brown taught a variety of subjects in grades 5 through 8, and it lists his responsibilities. He was one of the boarding house masters responsible for approximately 65 students, ages 9 to 14. It goes on, quite long. After 18 years of service, the letter concludes, Mr. Brown submitted his resignation in May of '93. Yours sincerely, the signature of Douglas Blakey, the principal. Principal Blakey has publicly maintained that he, quote, terminated Mr. Brown's employment. In his letter of reference, however, he writes that Douglas Brown simply resigned. This is after a 2-month investigation by Fraser Beatty, after the complaints of the students. You're an expert. You see a letter like that. Is that passing the trash?
In general, yes. If I wanted to pass the trash, I would write a letter like this. Unfortunately, it's normal. You know, across Canada and the U.S., teachers who resign because of allegations of sexual abuse often get some letter from the board that's trying to get rid of them, and they often use that to get a job elsewhere. So if anyone called me, my advice would be unequivocal. You shouldn't write those letters. If you don't want someone working for you in your school, they shouldn't be working for any other school, period.
Douglas Brown did go on to teach at other schools. He taught in the Maldives Islands, and then through a Canadian institute called Red River College, he took a position teaching in China. We wanted to talk to Douglas Blakey and ask him why he wrote Douglas Brown a letter, why he didn't go to the police back in 1993, but Principal Blakey refused to grant us an interview. He did send us a letter, however, saying, quote, "We are trying to move forward," and, quote, "We're practicing what we teach in our classrooms, which is to do the right thing." Principal Blakey's tenure at UCC has just been renewed for another 2-year term. Those involved in the class action suit will have to wait for the courts to decide if UCC did do the right thing, and that wait is a long one. What other elements of your life have been affected?
Not really feel like being social, pulling back from most of society and even whatever the hell's left of it that I run into. My social life consists of people's answering machines, lawyers, and therapists right about now. I just try to do my best to try to protect myself and still be able to walk away with some dignity, even if it's everybody's going, "It's okay, you're not responsible." That fuck means fuck all. You're the one that's got to look at yourself in the mirror.
When we come back, we'll ask 3 former Upper Canada graduates who have just watched our documentary how they feel about what they've just seen.
Welcome back. So now Upper Canada College is facing a $62 million lawsuit in connection with the allegations of sexual abuse that took place at the school. Did UCC do the right thing when they found out about the allegations? 3 old boys from the school who have just watched our story join Evan now to discuss that question.
I'm joined now by John Stackhouse, former foreign editor at the Globe and Mail. John attended UCC from 1976 to 1981. Thanks for being here, John. We also have Brendan Caldwell, who is the president of Caldwell Securities Limited. He attended UCC from 1978 to 1987. Nice to see you, Brendan. And also we have Jay Richardson, who is the managing director of Merchant Capital Group. He attended UCC from 1955 to 1962. John, I want to start with you. You've obviously been receiving the letters that UCC have been sending out about this case. Has UCC done the right thing in your mind when these allegations came forward?
Well, the college has certainly improved over the last 12 months in terms of its approach to this issue, but it still has not admitted any guilt or wrongdoing. I suppose now they're in a difficult legal position, and I think a lot of people assume when they read communications from the school that it's because their lawyers are saying, look, you can't say we did something horribly wrong here because that's going to affect the lawsuit. But the school did do something horribly wrong. I hope most people recognize that.
Jay, you saw the piece. Has UCC been forthright in doing the right thing?
I think they're trying to do the right thing. In my mind, they're still falling short. The letter that came out this week from Principal Blakey and the chair of the Board of Governors has broadened the process, but still falls short of any suggestion that there will be an institutional acknowledgement. I think that acknowledgement by the institution is crucially important.
Brendan, does it disappoint you that the letter of reference that Principal Blakey wrote to Douglas Brown, that the lack of records about his 18 years there, that this hasn't come forward by UCC itself?
Well, I mean, I don't know how much the school can come forward. They are still in the process of trying to figure out what all happened, because it was, if it was more than Doug Brown and more than one teacher, more than one student, they're in the process of trying to get to the bottom of it. So I'm not sure they won't come forward with some sort of acknowledgement once they figure it all out, but it's going to be a while. Does the letter of employment, letter of reference trouble me? Well, I don't know what else you could do. I mean, they say one says he resigned, one says he was fired, but that's the way things tend to go.
But even if you're not legally obliged, after you found out there's 3 allegations from 3 victims, would you write a letter of recommendation for a guy that you've had these allegations?
No, you certainly wouldn't, although I think this points more to UCC's past from a few decades ago about how the school dealt with these sorts of issues, and I would greatly hope that this is not the way things are done now. I'd be shocked if they are.
Even though it's the same, I mean, are you disappointed that it is the same principal who is being open about what he wants to do in the future, but hasn't disclosed the details about what happened in the past? You say decades ago, but it was 1993 we're talking about.
I'm disappointed, and while I recognize that oftentimes letters of reference attempt to be nothing more than factual restatements, the omissions, it seems to me, are suggestive of there being no problem when I believe he knew there was a problem.
Well, for him to get a job, he had to go to the Maldives and the Indian Ocean to get another job teaching again. So it wasn't that, it couldn't have been that glowing a letter of reference.
Now, you had him as a teacher in grade 6. You had Doug Brown as a teacher.
Yeah. And honestly, I was mixed on him as a person, but he was a spectacular English teacher. And for those that were less mixed on him, then you know, they could probably just see him as a spectacular English teacher. So,
what do you think about when you see the victims, and their allegations, that their experience was obviously different than yours?
I mean, I'm deeply saddened that my contemporaries would have suffered that badly. I mean, it's a really awful situation that's been repeated at Upper Canada and the Catholic Church and Maple Leaf Gardens. You know, it's a messy, messy situation that I hope they get to the bottom of. And more than that, I hope that there's some peace brought to that young man and others that have been suffered like this.
Is it different for a place like Upper Canada College, well known across the country? It's an elite institution. Is it different than what happens at the schools with Native kids, at the Catholic churches, at hockey arenas?
No.
Is there something different?
No, and I would stress that. I think we have a societal problem in how we deal with children and in placing children under the authority of adults. UCC is getting a lot of attention because it's a very high-profile school, so it has to accept that. But this is true right across the country, and as I say, it's a societal problem. UCC's problem is more than Doug Brown. There was a problem of supervision there, and that's the same in the Catholic Church, at Maple Leaf Gardens, in minor league hockey. There is a lack of supervision. There's also a lack of awareness, and this is just we're starting to see some progress on this, of children's rights, of children knowing that they have rights. I think UCC now makes it clear to its students that they do have rights, even if they're in the prep school or very young. But as a society, we've got a huge way to go in terms of making serious progress.
I think what's shocking about this is that it's not typical at-risk youth, but frankly, the kids in the boarding house in the prep were as much at risk as anyone in terms of being vulnerable, being sent away from their families for a whole host of reasons at 6, 7, 8, 10 years old.
It's a question of authority. I mean, that is often the root of abuse cases is the authority relationship. And in a boarding school, authority is almost absolute, which is highly dangerous.
So what happens now, Jay? How does Upper Canada fix itself? How does it repair the damage that this case has caused?
I hope one of the things that happens, Evan, is that you do more shows specifically on Upper Canada, but generally on these kind of abuses, because the catalog of abuse at Upper Canada is far beyond sexual abuse. It goes all the way from bullying at one end of the spectrum to the incredible number of suicides that there have been amongst my colleagues while students and after their student days. I think that the commission that Justice Robbins is running is going to be a very important healing process. How the college responds to that, whether it can come out and acknowledge, if not admit guilt.
By the way, can Principal Blakey do that? I mean, can he come forward now and say, yes, I wrote a letter of reference for him, yes, I didn't go to the police in 1993, even though 2 victims were willing to cooperate? How does he deal with that now?
I think he needs to, but I think that his insurers and his lawyers are sitting very heavily on him. I think that his actions are terribly constrained, but I am sure that he wants to be able to do that, and I trust that at some point he will be able to.
I'm going to ask one last question. You've been donating to UCC before your company. Will you continue donating?
Yes, we will.
You? Any of you? I know you don't, for other reasons.
It's just for other reasons. I have a lot of causes overseas that I think are more demanding than UCC, but that has nothing to do with the school.
I feel similarly to John, and my supportiveness of the college was demonstrated by my sending my son there for an education, even though I didn't feel very happily towards my own days there, but I do believe that he got a good education there.
Thanks, all of you, for joining us.
Thank you, Evan.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Evan.
If you have anything to say about the story or anything else in our program, we want to hear it. You can send a letter or postcard to this address: CBC News Sunday, Box 500, Station A, Toronto, Ontario, M5W 1E6. Or if you prefer, you can email us at sunday@cbc.ca. Or you can call our toll-free number at 1-866-285-1818. And don't forget to check out our website at cbc.ca/Sunday for more information and feedback. now it's time for a Sunday feedback segment where you tell us what you think about our program, and you had a lot to say about last week's program, particularly about our story on the allegations of sexual abuse at Upper Canada College. Here's a sample of your feedback.
Well, it's not a very good morning for me after watching your story on Upper Canada College. I, too, was abused by a teacher. A few minutes into the show, I almost threw up because of the vivid remembering coming through to me. And I appreciated your show, but boy, oh boy, there could be certainly more substantial information why this went on at that institution and why it goes on in other institutions.
I thought it was very good, and I just thought that the woman you put on, whose son was tutored by the teacher in question, this woman absolutely would never consider the possibility of this man being guilty.
It's such an injustice that men, this many years later, will, in fact, jeopardize their whole family name, disgrace their family name. Think of it. They will obviously never be able to run for politics. Their names will be in the newspaper. Their kids will never belong to a good club or good school.
Protection of name, family name, and appearances were absolutely everything at the expense of any truth.
Virginia Jonason from Red Lake, Alberta, agreed. She wrote, "What appalled me the most was the woman who vehemently defended the actions of the teacher involved. It is the denial of people like this that re-victimize us all over again. Sullying the family name, good clubs, and getting good job references has nothing whatsoever to do with bringing this issue forward. Education is the only answer."
But Nick Reykjavik felt differently. He attended UCC in the class of 1993 and wrote, "The CBC should also strike some balance. UCC is the finest school in this country. It offers top facilities and programs to many walks of life and social statuses. I came from an ethnic family of modest means, but was accepted to the school on a scholarship, became a boarder, and ironically had Mr. Brown as an associate housemaster. In my time at the school, I never felt physically threatened. Instead, I graduated with a greater sense of personal empowerment and a feeling that the school had greatly contributed to my personal growth."
It's too bad we can't put all our letters on. We certainly got a lot from last week, both about the UCC and, of course, the Colm Fior interview.
Oh, that's right. The Colm Fior interview, which we ran last week. And by the way, Trudeau is on tonight. It starts at 8 o'clock.
Great reviews on that. Now, if you have anything to say about this story or anything else on our program, we want to hear you. You can send us a letter or a postcard to this address, CBC News Sunday, Box 500, Station 8, Toronto, Ontario, M5W1E6. Or if you prefer, you can email us at sunday@cbc.ca, or you can call our toll-free number. That is 1-866-285-1818. And don't forget to check out our website. That's at cbc.ca/Sunday for more information and more feedback.